Talk 9. Stuff as it is. When we talk about stress in our lives, it usually isn't caused by one big event. It comes from a handful of very ordinary pressures that most of us carry every day. Worries about money, financial security sit in the background, the body ages, health becomes uncertain, and energy changes. Relationships bring care, but also tension and misunderstandings. Family obligations pull us in different directions. Time always feels short, and many of us carry a sense of being behind. We meet loss and change often before we feel ready. There's money stuff and financial insecurity. There's health stuff, niggles, aging and the body failing, time pressure stuff and feeling behind, family obligation stuff and expectations, getting along with difficult people stuff, feeling tired more often than expected stuff, decisions that feel bigger than they are stuff, household maintenance stuff, and a vague sense of falling behind. Okay, money stuff. A man in his late 60s stands in a supermarket aisle comparing 2 bags of rice. It isn't really the price that tightens him, it's the thought of one unexpected bill, a medical test, a car repair. At the supermarket checkout, there is that familiar pause as the total appears on the screen, a held breath while the card processes. An envelope sits, unopened, on the table at home. But the unspoken question of what happens if help is needed, and whether asking would feel like losing something important. A young couple in a new city shares a single dessert on their anniversary. They tell themselves it's romantic, but beneath that story sits a softer uncertainty. Are they further behind than others? Is life supposed to look more settled by now? This isn't about greed or extravagance. It's about holding independence together, just enough, and sensing how fragile that holding can feel. The Buddha spoke of gain and loss as ordinary winds, not personal verdicts. So the practice here isn't solving money. It's noticing the quiet tightening that appears before anything actually goes wrong, and allowing, even briefly, the possibility that enough might be allowed to be enough without needing to justify itself. Time pressure stuff. Try present moment awareness and mind the gap. At some point, the calendar is full and it is no longer clear how that happened. Looking ahead at the week, you can bring tiredness before anything has begun. Not because there is a crisis, but because there is no space between things. One commitment presses into the next. One obligation leans on another. Saying yes feels polite. Many yeses soon become a full calendar. Like a chain of cause and effect. A full calendar becomes tiredness. Tiredness shortens patience. Short patience leads to acting in ways that lead to regret, often expressed in the wrong moment. Broken attention creates the sense of falling behind. Feeling behind triggers more checking your phone. And slowly, without spectacle, life begins to feel heavier. Irritation appears when someone moves slowly. One task ends, and the next already rehearsed. The Buddha pointed out that pressure often comes not from what is happening, but from how the mind leans into the future. Restlessness can disguise itself as importance. Speed can feel like responsibility. The inquiry here is gentle, not corrective. When does everything start to feel a little too rushed? And just as importantly, where might a single pause interrupt the chain? Sometimes one small gap is enough for space to return. Family expectations. Instead of family pressure, wise boundaries and non-attachment. Another common tension is family expectations. Obligations, guilt, comparisons, and unspoken rules. Often the pressure does not come from what family members actually say. It comes from what is already decided. Rest begins to feel like neglect. Distance feels like disloyalty. Silence is interpreted as disapproval, and roles are carried that were never clearly agreed to, only absorbed over time. Many people discover they are still living inside expectations formed decades ago. Ways of being a good son, a good daughter, a good parent, or the reliable one, that once made sense, but no longer quite fit. What makes this especially difficult is that care and pressure become tangled. Guilt begins to masquerade as love. Comparison quietly enters. Who gives more? Who sacrifices more? Who copes better? The Buddha was careful with this kind of pressure. Family responsibility was not dismissed, but neither was self-erasure endorsed. Care in the Dharma is reciprocal. It is meant to support life, not quietly exhaust it. And perhaps most importantly, what would change if care did not require constant self-pressure? Letting go of a false choice is not abandoning love. It is allowing it to breathe. Getting along with difficult people. Instead of relationship conflict, loving kindness, mettā. Another common tension is getting along with difficult people. Neighbors, colleagues, relatives, siblings. Often the difficulty is not that someone is openly hostile or doing anything clearly wrong. It is more subtle than that. Sometimes some difficult people are easier to recognize when difficult people are thought of as animal types. There is the parrot, who repeats advice before you finish speaking, as if listening were optional once a familiar phrase appears. There is the peacock, whose mere arrival subtly shifts the room, not through words, but through the quiet demand to be noticed. There is the elephant, who never forgets old family stories, grudges, or roles, and somehow brings them back into the present, no matter how much time has passed. Then there is the cat, agreeing in the moment, nodding along, only to do exactly what it had personally intended to do anyway, only once no one is looking. There is the social chameleon, who requires constant adjustment because their mood and stance keeps changing, leaving you alert and slightly tense without knowing why. There is the snail, moving slowly and reasonably, yet somehow generating irritation far out of proportion to the situation. There's also the crow, who doesn't quite listen so much as wait, hovering until there's just enough space to drop in their own story, hijack the conversation, and fly off with the moment. There is the beaver, busy and industrious, whose small, clumsy, Gaelish actions quietly create extra work for everyone else. while everything is treated as perfectly normal. Then there's the rabbit, constantly alert, nervous, anxious, and easily startled, scanning for problems that may or may not exist, leaving you subtly tense just being nearby. And there is the leech, who never demands or attacks, who may even seem pleasant enough, yet leaves you feeling oddly drained afterwards, unsure exactly where the energy went. And the question is not how to change them, but what happens inside us when we notice the defensive bracing begin. Nothing obvious is happening, and yet something inside tightens. It is easy to assume the problem is the other person. A quiet bracing appears, a readiness to defend, explain, endure, or perform. Sometimes there is relief when plans are cancelled. Sometimes there is smiling when something inside contracts. Sometimes a short interaction requires a long recovery. And then a question quietly forms. Why does it take so much effort just to be normal? The Buddha was precise here. Irritation does not begin with the person. It begins at contact, sound, words, memory, and tone. And then the mind completes the story. Peace becomes possible when the work shifts location from fixing others to guarding our own heart. Who tends to evoke quiet bracing before contact occurs with them? What changes when tightening is noticed without justification? Where might contact be met without turning it into character judgment? Sometimes the most compassionate move is not solving the relationship, but refusing to let it harden our own mind. That already is a form of freedom. Technology stuff, the hassles. Another common tension is technology hassles. Phones, updates, passwords, systems that do not work. Technology has a special way of compressing frustration into very small moments. Even the hardware. I was in Gurney Plaza, looking at getting a new device. At that time, the iPad was new, and I was only used to laptops. So it was very hard to decide if it was a good idea to get one. The sales assistant spoke persuasively and kept showing features. Yet I just couldn't decide about it. In a moment of wanting to feel and appear decisive, I decided to stop discussing and considering and end the conversation. Now, usually if I'm tired and exhausted after a long session on my laptop, I will slap the lid down. And so that's what I did, turning to look away and change the subject. Only it wasn't a laptop lid, it was a brand new display iPad. I had flapped it, whap, face down onto the work surface. Oops. I blushed, apologized, and put it back up. Fortunately, nothing was damaged but my pride. On another occasion, I was exhausted from swiping my phone screen and working away on some endless project. I went over to my clipboard and swiped up and up. Nothing. I was trying to swipe up a sheet of A4 paper. Devices. A device demands an update 5 minutes before departure. A password used for years is suddenly not accepted. A screen freezes during something that actually matters. An account locks access, and there is no human to speak to. Only menus apologizing for the inconvenience they are creating. What stands out is not the malfunction itself. It is how quickly patience evaporates, often faster than with people. The body tightens, the jaw sets, the breath shortens, and irritation turns personal almost instantly. Why now? Why won't this work? Why does this keep happening? The Buddha's teaching is quietly helpful here. Irritation does not arise because things fail. It arises because of delight and clinging. But machines do not promise care, timing, or understanding. They do not exist to protect schedules or our dignity. They simply respond to conditions. This is why technology exposes something raw, our tolerance for uncertainty and loss of control. The practice here is not loving technology and not suppressing irritation. It's simpler. Notice irritation as a passing state, not a personal failure. Notice how quickly this shouldn't be happening becomes a story about our competence or our self-worth. And see whether humour can enter after the heat, even briefly. The wise mind is not unshaken because nothing goes wrong. It is unshaken because conditions are not taken personally. Even when the laptop slams shut, that too is part of our practice. Energy stuff. Feeling tired more often than expected. Another common tension is feeling tired more often than expected. Physical, mental, or both. This kind of tiredness often arrives quietly. Plans are cancelled, not suddenly, just postponed again and again. Convenience begins to replace care. Tempers shorten. Social circles shrink, not from conflict, but from lack of energy. And gradually, fatigue starts to feel like a verdict. There is a quiet internal shift. I should be coping better. Others seem fine. Perhaps this is just aging. Perhaps something is failing. What becomes clear is that tiredness is rarely only physical. It's often layered with expectation, comparison, and guilt. The Buddha spoke about energy not as something to maximize, but as something to balance. Too little effort collapses into dullness. Too much effort collapses into exhaustion. Both are conditions, not character flaws. Fatigue becomes suffering when it is shamed. The teaching here is neither indulgence nor forcing. It is listening earlier. A cooling move is available before fixing, before analysis, before interpretation. Let tiredness be information rather than judgment. Notice how often the word should appears in your thought stream. Allow something to remain unfinished without apology. Rest does not have to be earned. Fatigue does not mean something has gone wrong. Sometimes it simply signals that effort needs retuning so that life remains workable, human, and kind. That pause itself is part of practice. Decision stuff. Another common tension is decisions that feel bigger than they are. What to say, where to go, whether to bother. At some point, small decisions begin to feel heavy. Should I reply now or later? Go out or stay at home? Speak up or let it pass? Should I spend money now or wait? Should I commit or keep options open? Maybe nothing substantial is at stake, and yet the mind reacts as if it's a do or die situation. It's not the decision itself, but the moral weight that gathers around the indecision, the inner pressure, the feeling of serious consequences. Choosing wrongly starts to feel as if it says something about our personality and character. Carelessness, selfishness, lack of wisdom. Often it is not fear of choosing wrongly that causes difficulty. It is fear of regret after choosing wrongly. The fear of replaying the moment later and thinking, this should have been obvious. It is often the mind refusing to release control. There is relief in allowing small decisions to remain small, and trusting that correction and flexibility are always possible. That wisdom grows through movement rather than paralysis or freezing. Simplicity returns when choosing no longer carries a verdict, that ease is not irresponsibility, it is freedom. Household maintenance stuff. Another common tension is household maintenance. The quiet rhythm of care, the diamonds in the dust, cleaning floors, fixing things, replacing items, organizing stuff. Much of life is not about progress, but upkeep of what we already have got. Cleaning something that will get dirty again. Fixing the same squealing door hinge. Fixing the same dripping watery leak. Fixing the same squeaky drawer. Organizing it all nicely. And watching it quietly drift back to that familiar disorder. Replacing those items that wear out. Accepting that having got things done is always temporary. The teddy bear's picnic. Once I was caring for my grandmother, my father's mum. She had had a stroke. I'd been cleaning up the house and was interested to tackle the stuff in the attic. Sure enough, I found lots of childhood items like books, toys, dolls, and teddy bears. I had this idea of washing them back like new and seeing the aunties and uncles' faces as they saw their childhood teddies and toys when they came to visit. I put one of the teddies in the washing machine to try. Went out. I actually forgot about it, and when I returned, one of my aunties was there. She asked me if I'd finished washing the vegetables. I was puzzled and confused. Vegetables? Which vegetables? She said, the ones in the washing machine. What? I opened the door of the washing machine to see that the teddy in there had exploded, emptied out all its little squares of foam from its insides, thick in years of dust, black dirt and soot, out into the water, which hadn't drained and was just sitting like a thick, dark green soup. My auntie had thought it was my mysterious way of making vegetarian soup. In the Buddha's teachings, everything conditioned requires care. The body needs washing. Living spaces need carefully tending to. Our minds and hearts need steady attention. Nothing stays orderly by itself. Nothing remains spotless, pristine, and unblemished without participation. But performing maintenance is not evidence of failure. It is evidence of living. When that rhythm of care is resisted, irritation arises. When it is met with softness, something changes. Cleaning and dusting become steadiness. Fixing and repairing becomes patience in action. Organizing becomes respect for the space that holds daily life. The Buddha compared mental cultivation to removing dust, not all at once, but gradually, again and again. Routine is not stagnation, it is continuity. And when maintenance is recognized as care rather than a failure, the nervous system settles. Nothing special needs to be achieved, just this ordinary tending, quietly keeping life workable. The vague sense of falling behind and keeping up with the Joneses. Another common tension is a vague sense of falling behind, not keeping up with life or standards or others. For many people, one of the quietest pressures in life is this feeling of being behind. Not that far behind, not failing outright, just being slightly out of step, behind siblings, behind friends and peers, behind parents or society's expectations, behind an imagined timeline, behind a version of oneself that was expected by now, sometimes behind, well, nothing actually real at all. What is striking is how this sense often appears, and completely without being invited. A comparison forms. I'm comparing myself to my sister. I'm comparing myself to others in my group. I'm comparing myself to that stranger in that car. Those or other thoughts arise, and the present moment, the sum total of our life, is suddenly felt as insufficient. In Buddha teachings, all comparing is seen as a way to cause suffering. Not only comparing upward or comparing downward, such as, am I better than them? Or am I as high up as them? Or are they below me? Or not as good as me? Bodies age at different speeds. Circumstances unfold unevenly for different people. When the mind believes it is falling behind, it often tightens, panics, and worries. Then we may rush and push, or a person's sense of confidence and well-being may collapse into quiet discouragement. But nothing in the Dharma suggests that society's expectations are meant to be kept up with. Life moves, conditions change, responses arise. There is no fixed self progressing correctly or incorrectly through time. There's no final benchmark or judgment panel waiting to be met, like an inner Simon Cowell on America's Got Talent. Contentment does not come from catching up with others or trying to. It comes from mindfully becoming aware of the habit of measuring ourselves against others, mindfully letting go of that tendency. As comparison softens, something settles. The present moment becomes enough again. Not because it is ideal, but because it is real. Nothing is wrong. Nothing needs to be caught up with. This moment is already here. And so is life, exactly as it is. As it is.